I know not everyone's here, but I've got a ton of stuff to get through today, so I'm going to barrel right ahead. If you guys can stay after, that would be great. If you guys can't stay after, then I'll probably have to pick this up at the next lecture. Okay, so this course covers producer theory to a large extent. And the basic material on this is supply by competitive firms, so that's what we're going to treat today. So we're going to focus on two questions. The first is, how do firms maximize profits? So that has to do with the legal structure of firms, ethical debates about the right objectives for firms to have, types of internal conflicts within firms we'll talk quite a bit about, incentive problems that arise within firms, and schemes, including financial schemes, to try to address those. We'll then talk about how firms' supply decisions depend on the time or duration of the supply that they're going to create. In particular, we'll talk about interpreting the notion of the short run and the long run in terms of the duration of production, and about two types of goods, factors, inputs for firms, storable and durable ones, and how the Le Chatelier principle relates those to the different supply curves. And we'll use that to derive a Marshallian approach to thinking about the way industries evolve or behave over time. And we'll give some applications of that. And as I said, the last of these topics may spill over a little bit into the next lecture. Okay, so firms come in 5 principal varieties, not principal, sorry. Though there are variations. One is sole proprietorships, which are basically mom and pop stores. Second are partnerships, which tend to be professionals that have full liability for the debts and legal obligations of the firm. Third are corporations, which are treated as separate individuals that have liability limited to the amount of money that's put within the company. So if someone comes to sue, or if they owe debts, you can't come after the individuals for those debts. They also have to pay taxes as corporations in addition to the taxes that the individuals pay. And there are two different types of corporations: privately held corporations that are held by a small number of individuals, and publicly held corporations whose stock trades on an open public market. A fourth type of firm is a nonprofit or a cooperative, and these are tax exempt but can't disperse profits, or in the case of cooperatives, can only disperse profits to people who are consumers or workers for the firm. State-owned corporations are government-run, which is quite uncommon in the developed countries, but does exist. Okay, so Jeannie is not here. Does anyone else want to tell me what are the two main ways that firms are financed? Sorry, remind me of your name. James.
Equity and debt.
And what are equity and debt, James?
Equity is requires no responsibility for payment on part of the firm, and it allows you a share of the dividends should they get passed out to partial ownership.
Yeah.
With voting rights usually attached.
Yeah.
And debt is hard responsibility.
Yep. And that's right. So debt is, you say you're going to pay a certain amount of money back to me, and if you do, you're off the hook. If you don't, then I can come after you in all sorts of ways. And the advantage of debt as a method of financing is that it's tax deductible. The interest that you pay on the debt can be deducted from the firm's taxes. Whereas the dividend payments out to the individuals who own the company can't be taxed, can't be deducted from taxes. And the way that debt holders control the company is usually putting restrictions on what the company is legally allowed to do. Whereas equity holders are the ones who actually like control the company day to day by voting on what they do. Now there are things that are in between these two. So preferred shares are somewhere in between debt and equity because they have more legal protections than debt holders do in terms of controlling the company, but then they don't have full voting shares. Okay, so most of the course is going to assume that firms maximize profits, but a natural question is whether they really do or whether they should do that. And so for the moment, I want to assume that owners want them to do that, and we'll come back to that assumption in a moment. And the basic idea behind that assumption is that if owners wanted to do something else with the money rather than just get the money themselves, they could always take the money out and then form a charity or whatever else they want to do with the money. Okay. The harder question is whether firms should try to maximize profits or whether they should try to maximize something else. And the corporate social responsibility debate says no, firms shouldn't try to maximize profits. They should try to achieve other social goals, deal with externalities, etc. And Milton Friedman argues very strongly against this position. And Eureka is not here. So does anyone else want to try to describe what Friedman's argument is? Yeah, Steve.
The manager would be acting as a civil servant by performing social responsibility. So that would be the responsibility of the state and not a corporation.
Yeah,
His only
that's right.
responsibility is the shareholder.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. So he says that, managers are like a machine, basically. They're supposed to serve the interests of the people who own them, which are the shareholders. And while the machine can do bad things and good things, we don't usually program the machines to decide what their own goals are. And to the extent that there are externalities, that's the responsibility of the government to try to solve those, not the responsibility of the owner, of the managers of the company. And if the shareholders want to do something else other than maximize profits, they should just take the money out and form a separate group to do those non-profit maximizing goals themselves. And therefore, anything that's called corporate social responsibility that isn't just a way of making consumers want to buy the products more and therefore increasing profits is effectively a way of stealing from the shareholders. Now, most economists, I think, are quite sympathetic to Friedman's argument, unless, of course, either you convince consumers to buy the product more or you convince people to work there more because it's an ethical environment, in which case you're getting effectively to pay them lower wages, and it is maximizing profits. Okay. Now, some people have made more modest claims that we should have, quote, a stakeholder society. And by that they mean that the firms, rather than maximizing the value to shareholders, should also take into account the effects that they have, not on distant social goals like preserving the environment or whatever, but on the workers and the consumers of the firm's product who are very directly affected, say, by the firm's exercises of market power and so forth. And some cooperatives are directly built on this model because the people who own the company are the workers and the consumers of the products. Now, Stakeholder Society argues that not only cooperatives, but all firms should act this way. And I think many, if not most, economists are skeptical even of this more limited claim. And the main reason is that unlike shareholders, workers and consumers have the opportunity, if they're not being treated so well, maybe at some cost, to leave the company and go work or buy products from somewhere else. Whereas that's not true for a shareholder. So a shareholder, Andre Schleifer famously said, puts money into the company. And then the question is, how the heck does he even get anything back out of it, right? Once he's put the money in, he's completely useless to the company. The company might as well just go and take everything from him, unless we have some system in place to ensure that he gets something out the other end. And so, a standard argument is because of that asymmetric relationship, it's much more important that a company protects the interests of their shareholders because there's really nothing else to protect the interest of the shareholders other than the legal mandates. Yeah.
In
Go ahead, James.
practice, isn't
Yeah.
it easier for shareholders to sell their shares than it is for a worker to change their job?
Yeah, but the shareholder share will lose all its value before he's able to sell it if,
If they're completely unprotected.
yeah, if they're not protected. Yeah. So, I mean, they can sell it, but they can only sell it for what other people think that the company's worth, right? So it's, so in some sense, you can think of the shareholders as a group as like all having put collectively their money in. You know what I mean? Whereas that's not really true for a worker or a consumer, because a worker or a consumer can just not have the relationship at all, right? Whereas a shareholder can only sell to someone else who's willing to take on the responsibility of being stolen from by the company. You know what I mean?
So as long as there's not sunk cost to the worker
Yeah,
or consumers,
yeah.
there's
Yeah, I mean, and there might be some, but usually they're not as extreme as they are. Yeah. Go ahead,
There
Mohammed.
are also some other stakeholders, like for example, firms that product inputs that are only used for a larger firm, so like they can't sell them. So or the communities that the firm is like inside the relative community. So sometimes
Yeah.
they call them as like stakeholder too.
Yeah.
And they can't go out or like.
Yeah, so the more locked in that consumers or workers are, the closer they're to being like this. And I think that's why you see more cooperatives in circumstances where people get really locked in. Okay. So, the argument that's typically made then is that the primary goal of corporate governance, including ideas that we have about corporate governance, legal protections, et cetera, should be to try to protect shareholder profits. Okay, but what do we mean by shareholder profits? So a naive definition of profits is just accounting profits, prices times quantities minus costs. But in reality, things are much more complicated than that. So one issue has to do with the distinction between economic and accounting profits. And is Ching-Chi here? No. Does anyone else want to try to give an example of a distinction between accounting and economic profits? Jim, yeah.
Opportunity costs, for sure. Like they could just match their money or their capital.
Yeah. So, imagine you have a proprietor who works at a firm. You should count the cost of, he could have made money doing something other than working at the firm in the firm's costs. And another, perhaps more important issue is that a firm can increase its profits often by just issuing more equity and then investing that extra money. But that doesn't actually make the firm more profitable, because it's really the profits per current shareholder that are the relevant metric, and just expanding, issuing more equity costs the current shareholders a share of the future profits. Another issue has to do with time and discounting. So profits in the future are worth less than profits are today, and therefore should be discounted, because the money that's made in the future, you don't have the opportunity to earn an extra return on it by investing it. However, there's also lots of things that might reduce short-term profits but increase profits tremendously in the long run. And so the firm has to do a balancing act in terms of thinking about current versus future profits and weighing them correctly. An even bigger issue comes up in terms of uncertainty, because if you don't know what's going to be best for the company, then you can't just maximize profits, right? You have to maximize expected profits. But even expected profits aren't the right thing, right? Because people care about risk. They'd rather have a certain amount of profits for sure than uncertain stream of profits, right? And so the traditional solution that economists have proposed to this is the stock market value of the company is really what the firm should be maximizing. But this has some problems as well, because for privately held companies, that's not possible. And even for publicly held companies, it's not that clear, as we've noticed through many financial panics and so forth, that the stock market value does a great job representing what the company's actually worth, right? So